Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a slightly different video. I haven't done this in a while, but this is more of a final thoughts video. So any sort of information coming from the pressers today, I'm trying to react to with a video and hopefully being able to give some insights on what I think are nice transfers to make, what has fundamentally changed really from the information that I've provided earlier in the week with the cheat sheet and things like that. I think the biggest thing to start with is Fulham. They have the best fixture this game week. We can start with the assessment of that by going to our friend Rob T's graphics in terms of the expectations for the game week here in terms of the matchups, right? Fulham have a game amazing, right? The expected goals very close to Liverpool, and this is Liverpool, a very top level offense. Fulham, I think probably if you looked at the course of their season so far, they've been a much better defense. But simply put, Southampton at home, a great fixture to really own certain players for. Southampton, obviously, with the new manager, I don't think he'll be there for the weekend. And so the expectation is, you have a Fulham side that have been extremely well oiled. They do have issues with the rotation, I believe. But the biggest news coming out of this weekend is that Tete is out for 8 to 10 weeks. And so I think that's very significant. And I'll talk about that later in terms of defenders. But going off of this Rob T graphic, I think what else is important to sort of reflect on for this game week is there aren't necessarily swings, but we have a generally good Man United run opening up, right? So your Amad Diallos of the world, they're quite interesting. Potentially Man United defense, because if you actually look at the open play numbers, they've been really positive. It's actually only their set piece defense has been lacking. Clearly, of course, you still need to make sure that that's rectified. But I think that's been a promising start in the Amorim tenure on both ends of the pitch. Other fixtures that I think that I would call out that are quite interesting are just the amount of games that look like, classic both teams to score. Chelsea have a great game in terms of, clean sheet odds, for example. That's worth calling out for. So do Arsenal, but not very high compared to the usual standards of each game week, right? Because I think that generally it seems like a lot of the sort of market models and team models have reflected the idea that Crystal Palace have looked like a much better side on both ends of the pitch recently. So that's why you don't have any team with 40-50% sort of clean sheet odds, which you'd usually get if, let's say, Arsenal, Liverpool had good games. Other than that, I think Newcastle have a great game as well, and that's pretty much it. And it seems like the markets have reflected some slight City impacts with Ruben Diaz being out, but I don't think it's been that significant since the defense has been poor, with and without Ruben, to be quite honest, even though he looks like a competent defender from a very incompetent team. That's the Rob T graphics. I think that it gives you a good flavor for the weekend, and it's always a good time to look at these sheets because it gives you an idea of, if you wanted to make some high upside moves that can still be long-term, which players to go for this game week to maximize here, but then also just thinking about the medium to long-term, which players are going to consistently play good minutes, etc., etc. So that's Rob T's graphic. Now, moving on, I think just quickly speak on defenders, because a lot of people are looking for going out of Ryan Aït-Nouri. I think some people have already gone into Robinson, which is fair enough, right? He's shown that he's been an incredible player this season, someone who's been able to play very consistent minutes no matter what. And I think he's a very logical pick. But with the news that Anderson is back in training and even the photo of Anderson back in full team training, that's a positive. But I don't think that he necessarily has to start this weekend. It is Southampton at home. If you look at the way managers unfortunately treat Southampton games, from the perspective of us FPL managers, we've seen rotation against Southampton or a team like that, right? So it's very plausible on a game week like this that you can see a slightly weaker Fulham team maybe if they're prioritizing, let's say, the Bournemouth game in the midweek. And they've got Chelsea after that. So two very tough games versus two top-level opposition. It kind of makes sense to me if you told me that Fulham could go a little bit weaker. Like, just the idea of playing Issa Diop over Anderson makes sense. The biggest news is going to be that Kenny Tete news for him being 8 to 10 weeks out, right? 8 to 10 weeks out shoots us all the way over towards the end of February, maybe even the start of March. And the positive thing from an FPL perspective is that the start of March, which is that first fixture in game week 28, that's a long time away, right? You've got probably 11 fixtures straight where you can get all the fixtures that you want from Castagna. You can get Leicester, you can get Southampton, you can get Ipswich. And so I think that's incredible value for a player at 4.2. Also extremely highly attacking from just historical precedent. And probably, of course, more attacking than his peer at 4.2 at Anderson. So I really do like Castagna as a pick. I think he's opened up a great option. And what's nice about Castagna is this really helps the types of managers who are thinking about Robinson or deciding between Robinson and Munoz, because you now have an attacking fullback who's much cheaper, a 0.5 cost saving, or at least a 0.6 cost saving, and that gives you so much flexibility over this run, right? That's the difference between, let's say, I don't know, an Amad and a Semenyo, that sort of thing, So you've got lots of moves to make over this run, and I really think Castañas is such an easy, clear defender option to go into this week, particularly if you are looking for a third defender to shop into. Now, the next point of discussion for me is whether you want to go for Munoz anyways, right? Munoz has, when you look at the underlying stats, he has been the most attacking player within the league from a defensive point of view outside of Trent Alexander-Arnold. And the difference is he's very expected goals driven compared to Trent, who's very expected assist driven. So once you kind of normalize those numbers for the fact that defenders scoring goals in FPL is so much more valuable than assists, then actually Munoz could arguably be one of the most, he could be just outright the most attacking pick in the game. And I actually don't think that that's a shock, because last season we saw not necessarily such great expected goals numbers, but we saw extremely high shot totals per game numbers, right? He's very reminiscent of someone like Porro, who takes an extremely large amount of shots per match. And as long as you've got nice Crystal Palace games, you're supplementing that with, you know, your clean sheet possibilities, and that higher end of the threshold of, I don't know, 15 points, for example, in FPL is potentially within reach because of how often he gets into good attacking positions, and how Crystal Palace have looked like they've actually shored up on defense, particularly with Chalobah and Lacroix sort of finding themselves into the side and sort of creating a much more defined backline that was better than what we saw after Anderson left, and of course Guehi is staying. So that, I think, is a nice consideration. But as I said, if you don't really need Castagna this game week, I can understand actually instead waiting for game week 19 for Munoz. But I think a lot of people are mischaracterizing how good that game week 18 fixture is for Crystal Palace. I think it's frankly an awful fixture. Bournemouth away is not a good game for me whatsoever. I think that Munoz is very clearly a 19 buy. I would not be buying him on 18 unless you were completely priced out. So that's kind of how I view Munoz. At the same time, Fulham also have a bad game week 18 fixture. So you kind of need to see which defender suits you more. What fixtures are you trying to rotate for? Because we know that Munoz is suspended versus Arsenal anyways. So those are my thoughts on defenders. Now, moving on to the midfield position, I think that the biggest topic that people really want to go into is who's the best budget midfielder. Now, clearly, Harry Wilson or Alex Iwobi probably have the better fixtures this game week, right? I think that's standout. That's clear. When you look at market odds for these players, the expectation is that they're just going to have much better numbers for this game week. But that's just this game week alone. I do think that Amad Diallo, with the amount of injuries that United have, with Mount confirmed to be several weeks out, we don't know how long that's going to be, but that means, you know, working back to fitness, potentially, you know, limited minutes, that sort of thing. That probably tells me that Mount's actually out for at least 5 to 6 game weeks potentially, looking at that sort of December to January run. So that's very significant. On top of that, we have Rashford, who's almost exiled himself from the squad. He wasn't in the Carabao Cup squad. He wasn't in the squad for the last 2 match days as well. So I think that this just gives so much more a minute share for Amad Diallo to play within those kind of attacking 10 positions. And so because of that, I think that Amad immediately inserts himself to being the top budget pick in the game. And that's my genuine opinion. I think his minutes should be stable. I think that his share should be stable. Yes, of course, we've seen Amarim want to rotate, but we're also seeing that there's a lack of bodies in terms of rotating. Amad is also a very intriguing player because when you look at a lot of the other attackers in the league, there's not many players who actually press as good as him who are that sort of winger/10 type role. So when you look at, for example, a team like Chelsea, their worst pressers are actually players like Madueke or Sancho. And I think it's such a huge plus in this sort of iteration of modern football that you have someone like Amad Diallo who can do that side of the game. Even arguably that goal versus Forster is a symptom of what he does, right? That sort of pressing. So I do really like Amad Diallo. He's my favorite pick. Other picks that a lot of people have been talking about are Enzo, and I've been quite high on Enzo. In fact, in my own FPL draft, I drafted him game week 13 as soon as I saw him play in the Europa Conference League match before the Leicester game, and he's had a string of hauls since then. I think the underlying numbers have clearly ticked up, and what I can say is that I've been looking into how the markets have adjusted into his sort of goal and assist shares, and it seems like that's ticked up, but I think that he's still a little bit lacking behind because we also know that his role is a little bit dependent on things like whether Lavia is fit and available, and he can play slightly defensive at times compared to someone like Amad, who I think if you're guaranteeing that he plays in that sort of 10 position is going to consistently get into good attacking spots, whereas Enzo can almost as a twin 10 still play a quite progressive deep lying role within the team at times just to sort of facilitate ball movement and things like that and progression. So I still think that Enzo's interesting because he also has set pieces. He also has permanence of minutes, right? So if you told me that Amad Diallo is prone to 70-minute substitutions, I'd say that's fine. Enzo probably isn't because he's actually getting completely rested within the European matches where possible. So I do think Enzo has better minutes, but once again, it goes back to these attacking baselines. I'd prefer someone who's more consistently in good attacking positions, which I think Amad Diallo will get over this run, and that's why I like Diallo more. Enzo clearly also has a great run of fixtures. You could conceivably hold him and play him up until something like game week, maybe let's say 26, 27. Like, there's a long, good run for Chelsea, and that's undisputable, because basically Chelsea have good fixtures all the way up until that Leicester match on game week 28. So, as I said, that's a really long run to own a player, and you'll have no qualms. But I think that Diallo, even though his fixtures are sort of up and down, he's the type of player that I'd happily rotate, and I think that I can maximize more value from than someone like Enzo, and that's just my personal opinion. I think Rodgers has played really good minutes as well. So has Semenyo. They both had decent underlying numbers, specifically Semenyo, but Semenyo clearly has not provided any returns, whereas Rodgers has provided some returns recently, but I can understand people looking at the short-term fixtures for Aston Villa and thinking that they need to sell him. I'm probably going to hold Rodgers, to be quite honest. I like the idea of actually holding Rodgers for fixtures like Brighton at home, Leicester at home, even arguably later down the line, West Ham at home, Wolves at home, Ipswich at home, around 23, 24, 25. So I still think that if you can rotate, let's say Ahmad and Rodgers, that potentially is the ideal rotation. Semenyo has started to drop in price, and I think if you've been holding Semenyo, I still think that he's a very strong pick. There's no need to really use -4s to move away from certain players like this. But if you wanted me to just simply tier these players as of this game week, I would probably go Mud first. It will be second, just because of how important this fixture is, right? If you suddenly asked me to tier these players next game week, I would not have Iwobi anywhere near the top 3, but it would be Iwobi, then I'd actually have Enzo, then Rodgers, then Semenyo, and Semenyo just simply because he's a little bit more expensive than the rest. Right now, when Money in the Bank is so important and people are looking for sort of as much money as possible to squeeze finite moves in different positions, right? Like, let's say stretching more money towards getting Liverpool players, stretching more money towards getting Isak, for example. Those kind of upgrades need Money in the Bank, and so I'm just going to put Semenyo there for now. Those are my kind of thoughts on the budget midfielders, but I still think if you own players like Rodgers and Semenyo and you've already got rotation in place, there's no need to absolutely rush into Amad Diallo. He's still ultimately at a price where you can afford to be late effectively on a player like Amad Diallo, because it's not necessarily the case that we're expecting 1 goal, 1 assist per game for him or anyone of this caliber. And equally, a lot of the players in this price range can also do the same when stars align. So those are my thoughts in terms of the midfield. This game week, I think, is an absolutely terrible game week to sell Mbeumo, so I would not be recommending people to really make moves to move Mbeumo out of the team. I think it's very luxury, very side grady, because an Mbeumo home fixture is something you probably don't want to miss out on. Yes, of course, Nottingham Forest have been good, but I'd take my chances with Mbeumo this game week and reassess later on if you're the type of manager thinking of wanting to jump on Amad Diallo. Now, closing off with the forward position, we actually have not gotten any definitive news from the FA in terms of how, let's say, Wolves have responded to, let's say, the potential appeal being raised. It doesn't seem like, based on what the new manager, Vitor Pereira, has said, that Wolves have really appealed the ban. I know it was initially potentially said by FPL Raptor that Wolves would likely appeal, and that could sort of increase the, I guess, sentencing or the length of the ban. We have no clarity on that. We also have no FA response as of when I'm recording, which is Friday, 6:30 p.m. So the way I see it, I would probably actually hold on to Cunha. It's even plausible right now, because of how tight the turnaround is with the midweek game versus Man United, that we could conceivably have Cunha playing versus Leicester and Man United, which clearly changes a lot of your plans as an FPL manager. So that's one thing I really want to point out from the outset, that is quite crucial to kind of understand the dynamics of whether Cunha is banned or not. I don't think that if we get zero news on, let's say, Cunha being banned before the deadline, that Cunha is suddenly going to get banned post-deadline on Saturday night. I think that would be too short notice for the Wolves potentially to sort of prepare their team in advance. And so I think it's more likely that the ban will come after game week 17, which means that you're probably going to get the advantage of being able to play Cunha this week. A lot of people are looking for moves away from Cunha, right? Down to Raul, which makes sense. I still have to say that listening to all the Marco Silva quotes, my concern with going for someone like Raul is not the immediate term fixture, right? If you can guarantee the start versus Southampton, who knows, you might get a super haul. He's actually the player who, as per market spreads, is a top 3 player this week in terms of goal scoring odds. So you already know how much value you can potentially get from Raul from just this game week alone. But I do think that you can guarantee with Cunha at the very minimum playing this fixture, which is, not something you really want to be dealing with if you're going to Raul, who's going to be competing with Muniz and who's also going to be losing minutes to Muniz ultimately, because it seems like Marco Silva also is very positive about Muniz's contributions recently. So I do think that you're just going to see rotation. And the issue too is you might see rotation around the nice games for Raul, like the Ipswich game later down the line. Even though it makes a lot more sense for someone like Muniz, if he's the second choice player, to play the FA Cup instead and to allow for Raul to play versus Ipswich. I just think it's very much plausible that if you continue to see, let's say, really good Muniz performances, that you can't guarantee someone like Raul is going to necessarily start that next Ipswich game, which makes planning ahead quite difficult with him. So I think that if you're going to Raul, it really must be necessitated by you making another free transfer in a different position that really upgrades your team, right? Making a move like Cunha to Raul allows you to get potentially $1+ million within your team, and that can be a lot of upgrades in different positions. If you're not doing that and you're just doing Cunha to Raul, I don't really like that move, to be quite honest. I just think it's better to sort of keep your eyes open to different assets and to players that you probably don't need to be messing with in the future in terms of free transfers, which is why I think Wood is still such a stable, solid pick that there are no issues with in owning for the meantime, if you're looking for someone who's just a little bit cheaper than Cunha. At the same time, I think if you want to push up right now for this game week to Isak and Jackson, even though Cunha has such a great fixture himself, I completely understand the want to move into a Jackson or an Isak. So if you have the opportunity to do that, and let's say you're going to do an Mbuma move, which I already said I don't like so much, I can understand wanting to do that if you're going to get priced out, right? Because this is such a good Isak fixture. This is such a good Jackson fixture. You might be losing out in terms of, are you making any significant positives to your team for the immediate game week? But if you're getting priced out of someone like Isak, ultimately Cunha will get banned eventually, right? I think we all know that that's likely to happen. So the idea that you want to keep Cunha doesn't make too much sense if right now you are 0.0 off of certain players like an Isak or a Jackson. So those are my thoughts right now on Game Week 17. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and good luck with your transfers. I'll see you guys soon.